Canada's opening a new door for its oil, and that could leave America in a very tough spot. For a long time, the US enjoyed lower prices because Canada had limited options. Now Canada is moving toward bigger markets, stronger deals, and more power while America watches its old advantage fade away.
A future bitumen pipeline to Canada's west coast could be approved as soon as next fall. That's according to a new agreement signed between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith Friday morning. The deal states Alberta will submit a pipeline proposal to the Major Projects Office before July 1st, with the federal government agreeing to designate it as a project of national interest by this October. The project still requires engagement with First Nations, Indigenous communities, as well as open discussions with British Columbia on a path forward. But the agreement states a West Coast pipeline is dependent on the Pathways carbon capture and storage project. That project is a partnership of major oil sands producers to trap emissions and transport them to a central hub. Alberta has also agreed to a new industrial carbon price, increasing to $100 per ton next year, eventually reaching $140 by 2040.
The United States operated under a comfortable assumption that Canadian oil had nowhere else to go. That assumption produced one of the most favorable commodity pricing arrangements in North American economic history. American refineries purchased Alberta crude at persistent discounts, sometimes $10 below world market price, sometimes $20, occasionally as severe as $46 per barrel, every single day for decades. That arrangement existed because Canadian producers had one primary buyer and one primary direction to send their product. What happened in Calgary in May 2026 is the most concrete and advanced threat to that arrangement that has ever existed. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith signed an implementation agreement targeting construction of a new oil pipeline to Canada's Pacific coast, a pipeline designed to carry up to 1 million barrels of Alberta crude per day directly to Asian markets. The American pricing advantage on Canadian heavy crude is built on a structural foundation. That foundation just developed a very large crack. The scale of what is being proposed makes the geopolitical significance immediate and specific. Trans Mountain, Canada's only existing Pacific Coast crude export pipeline, currently runs near full capacity at approximately 590,000 barrels per day. It opened its expanded capacity in May 2024 and has been full ever since. Every barrel of Alberta oil sands production that cannot flow west through Trans Mountain flows south into the American refinery system at a WCS-WTI discount. The proposed new pipeline is not an incremental Trans Mountain expansion. It is a separate 1 million barrel per day infrastructure project, almost double Trans Mountain's current capacity, directed at Asian buyers paying Brent-linked global market prices. When that pipeline is operating, Canadian heavy crude producers will have a genuine choice between American buyers and Asian buyers. That choice is the end of the structural pricing advantage American refineries have held for 4 decades. The implementation agreement is the culmination of a memorandum of understanding Carney and Smith signed in November 2025. The MOU committed both governments to a set of conditions that, once met, would clear the pathway for the pipeline. Friday's agreement resolved the most contested, outstanding condition, the industrial carbon pricing path that Ottawa required Alberta to commit to before the federal government would designate the pipeline a project of national interest. Alberta's industrial carbon price will stay at $95 per ton through the end of 2026, then rise toward $130 per ton by 2035 and $140 per ton by 2040. That trajectory is substantially lower than the previous federal policy, which would have imposed $170 per ton by 2030. Alberta's industry partners are projected to save approximately $250 billion in compliance costs over the next 2 decades as a result of the revised pathway. The pipeline is linked to the Pathways Alliance carbon capture, utilization, and storage project, a $16.5 billion initiative involving Canada's 6 largest oil sands producers. The project will capture CO2 from 13 oil sand sites and transport it through approximately 600 kilometers of pipeline to underground storage south of Cold Lake, Alberta. Carney described the combined package as capable of achieving emissions reductions equivalent to removing 90% of Alberta's vehicles from the road while generating over $16 billion in GDP. The implementation agreement makes the 2 projects mutually dependent. the pipeline does not proceed without the Pathways project advancing, and the Pathways project's commercial viability is tied to the pipeline's approval. The package is expected to create up to 50,000 jobs in Alberta and across Canada. The economic modeling attached to the Combined Infrastructure Program describes an impact that goes well beyond Alberta's provincial output. ATB Economics estimates that Pathways and additional pipeline capacity, including planned Trans Mountain expansions alongside the new West Coast pipeline, could together add an average of 1.1% to Canada's real GDP and 5.1% to Alberta's real GDP between 2027 and 2035. ATB Chief Economist Todd Parsons wrote, "If executed, this is by far the largest upside to our Alberta forecast and a material upside to our Canadian outlook." The conditional phrase, "if executed," is the honest acknowledgement embedded in every credible assessment of the project's prospects. The conditions that must be met between Friday's signing and actual construction are sequential and documented. Alberta must submit a pipeline proposal to the Federal Major Projects Office by July 1st, 2026. No private sector pipeline company has formally stepped forward as proponent as of the agreement's signing. Identifying and securing a proponent is the precondition for the July 1st submission. The federal government must designate the pipeline a project of national interest by October 1st, 2026. Indigenous consultation under Section 35 of the Constitution Act must be completed before that designation can be issued. The Alberta government's stated construction target is September 1st, 2027, with first oil projected around 2033 or 2034. CIBC World Markets analysts Robert Catelier and Rogan Anantharaja assessed that timeline precisely. They characterized the September 2027 construction start as optimistic and reflective of a best-case scenario. They noted that while pipeline companies remain open-minded to participating, several conditions remain outstanding to support the enormous combined investment in production, carbon capture, and the pipeline. They described Friday's agreement as certainly incremental progress, the most precise phrase available for a policy framework with specific deadlines and no confirmed private proponent. The opposition to the project is documented and active. British Columbia Premier David Eby called the agreement an energy vampire that rewards bad behavior. Coastal First Nations leader Marilyn Slett said coastal nations remain firmly opposed to the proposed Northern BC port option. The Alberta government's preference for a Northern BC route, which offers a shorter shipping distance to Asia, requires resolution of the Federal Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, which prohibits tanker loading on the Northern BC coast. That moratorium requires federal legislative amendment. BC negotiations must be completed. The regulatory review must proceed through the Major Projects Office. The financing must be assembled at a scale no private sector balance sheet will absorb alone. What Washington is calculating is not the September 2027 construction date.